He was 85 years old and had waited a long time, or a very long time, for this moment. 45 years to be exact. I'm talking about Caleb and the story that we read in Joshua chapter 14 of Caleb talking to Joshua and really asking for his inheritance that was part of the promised land that God was giving to his people. It's a great story. It's a challenging story, but there's one phrase in it that just intrigues me. And we find it in verse 7, which is this, that now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this. That refers to the promise to Moses, while Israel moved about in the wilderness. So here I am today. And it's that phrase that of while Israel moved about in the wilderness that intrigues me. I find it fascinating. And I also think it needs a little bit of a reality check. As you remember, the story is that Caleb and Joshua, two of the original 12 spies that went in to spy out the promised land sent by Moses, and they were the two that came back and said, yeah, it's great. It's everything God said it was going to be. And yeah, there's some problems and difficulties, there's giants, but God's greater. God is with us and God has promised. So yeah, let's go for it. But the other 10 spies, they were just full of unbelief and they just saw the problems. They just saw the challenges, and that blocked their vision of God. And because of their unbelief, all the Israelites were given over really to this time of wandering. 40 years in the wilderness, long time. And obviously Joshua and Caleb were the two that survived that, as God promised, so that they would enter their inheritance. But that phrase, 40 years of wandering, how would we have summed that up? There's so many alternative ways to how Caleb summed it up. We could blame others. He could have said, those unbelieving spies, they kept us out. It was all their fault. It was their unbelief. He could have blamed others. He could have just felt sorry for himself. You know, you've no idea the struggles I've been through. You've no idea what I've had to live with for 40 years. Woe is me. He could have just summed it up with resentment, bitterness, and just said, well, that's it. Best years of my life gone. You know, kind of prime of life wasted in some back end of the wilderness. Or he could have summed it up with self-righteous comments like, well, here we are. Josh, you and I told you so. You know, we were right. They were wrong. But somehow it was none of these. Now, did he feel these things or battle with these things? I guess so, because he was flesh and blood like we are. But they weren't the reactions that defined him. And I think that's the key thing. What actually defined him? And it was the phrase, we find it there again in chapter 14, which says, I followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. Powerful phrase. It's actually the phrase that God himself commends Caleb for all those years earlier that we read about in Numbers 14, where God says this, that because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land. In other words, it was true of him as a younger person, and it's true of him in old age. And so that call for our relationship with God to be our first priority, our first passion, to be the thing that defines us, is true for us, whatever our age, whether we're young, whether we're older. It's that same call to follow him. For us, it's that call to follow Jesus, to know him, It's the call of discipleship. We're living in challenging times. Please don't interpret what I'm saying in terms of, I'm saying that we're destined to 40 years of wandering in lockdown wilderness. Not saying that. But the reality is, I think we're in for long-term challenges. And there's all sorts of upheavals and changes and just challenges to our lives that can involve disappointments, they can involve frustrations, they can involve discouragements. We don't know. So what's going to define us? Will it be the circumstances we're living through, or is it something else? And I want to encourage us all. It's encouragement to me, but encouragement to us all. Let's be those who learn to follow Jesus in this. Let's be those who know that we can follow him. He makes it possible through his Spirit at work in us and through his word. We can follow him and we can be of a different spirit. Let's learn from Caleb. Let's not surrender to just the ways that our hearts can so easily lead us at times to either self-righteousness or blaming others or accusing others or blaming ourselves or anything like that. But let's learn to follow Jesus in these times. Let's catch the Caleb spirit. God bless you and be with you in whatever you're doing. May you know his help, his strength. Let's follow him wholeheartedly.